Morjentes ja tervetuloa Tyrnävä Showhun. Tartarian myyttiä taas pikkusen aukastaan. Eli Tartarian hävittäminen, vanhan maailman nollaus ja kysymysmerkki. Eli nämä on aina kysymysmerkkejä, kun puhutaan tämmöisestä myyteistä tai teoriasta vanhasta historiasta. Mutta tässä tulee nyt kiinnostavaa matskua ja vilkaistaan eka vaikka tätä Xää. Tämä on mun X:stä, eli Tartarian leijuvat raitiovaunut. Onko tällaisia todella ollut? Löytyykö Venäjältä edelleen tällaisia teitä? Eli tässä on kysymysmerkit. Nämä ei ole väitteitä, nämä on kysymyksiä. Ja tämmöinen tuli X:ssä vastaan. When they are going to tell us. Ja tässä olisi niin kuin väitetysti tämmöinen raitiovaunu, joka kulkisi ilman kiskoja. Ja nämähän on vanhoja kuvia, joita on voinut muokkailla miten vaan, että näihin ei voi millään tavalla luottaa, mutta että se menisi tämmöisen päällä, että tämmöistä olisi ollut ympäri maailmaa. About the electric roads ja leijuvat raitiovaunut. Ja tämä on Kronstadtista, Pietarin lähistöltä. En ole käynyt paikan päällä, mutta siellä pitäisi olla vielä ainakin joku 160 metriä tämmöistä tietä. Ja käsitykseni mukaan tällaisia on ollut ympäri maailmaa. Niin, katsellaanpa tämä tästä. Tämä on kiinnostavaa. Ja ennen kaikkea siinä, että me unohdetaan, minkälainen suurvalta Venäjä on ollut 1800-luvulla. Noin, antaa sen olla siinä. Ja mennään sitten katsoa tästä niin mä tuun näyttää tämmöisen puolen tunnin keskusteluohjelman. Tässä on 2 kaveria, ja mä en ole heidän kanssaan läheskään kaikista asioista samaa mieltä, ja varsinkaan siitä, mitä heillä niin kuin, kanavan niin kuin se normaali matsku on. En ole mikään ufo-ihminen ja niin poispäin, mutta tämä Tartarian juttu on oikein kiinnostavaa, ja nämäkin mä sanoin, että nämä on kysymyksiä, nämä ei ole väitteitä, mutta tämän mukaan tämä, että mihin tämä Tartaria tuhoutuu, että se ei ole mihinkään sotiin, niin kuin pääsääntöisesti sotiin, totta kai niitä silläkin tuhottiin, mutta nämä mutatulvat, että olisi tullut 3 suurta mutatulvaa, ja ensimmäinen olisi ollut 1740, toinen 1834 ja kolmas 1892. Eli toistan. Ensimmäinen mutatulva vuonna 1740, toinen mutatulva vuonna 1834, kolmas mutatulva 1892. Ja tämä olisi aiheuttanut suuret muuttoliikkeet ja sitten tätä Tartarian tuhoa, jota olisi sitten hoidettu näillä sodilla. Niin tämä on kiinnostava väite, mutta tässä ohjelmassa niin kaverit kyllä sitten kertoo siitä enemmän. Ja se on kiinnostavaa. Ja kuten sanoin, minä en väitä, että nämä luvut pitää paikkansa. Mä en tiedä, mihin ne perustuu, mutta on kiva, että ekan kerran, kun mä kuulen tästä mutatulmasta, että siihen on ne vuosiluvut kerrottu. Niin mennään katsomaan. Tämä on mielestäni kiinnostavaa asiaa. Olisivatko asiat voineet mennä näin?
So hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. We are doing it live today. As you can see, we have a live setup, which is very nice. We get together sometimes and discuss things. We're not just purely on the internet and going through Zoom. But today we're going to discuss the Vanished Kingdoms book that really Stephen's put so much research into. We've both worked on it, but particularly Stephen has done a huge amount of work. Anyone that doesn't know, introducing Stephen, anyone that's new to the channel, this is my brother Stephen. We've done lots of Sacred Wisdom podcasts. This man is incredible with his knowledge and research and information, and we shared a lot of information over the years. A lovely feeling to get this Tartarian book out, because I think we both had a lot of passion about this old world empire, and we saw the need in this time to bring this back alive, you know.
Yes.
And yes, so this is Stephen Denman. So how are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well, and I hope it was good with you, Zach, and I hope it was good with the viewers out there.
Yes, and Stephen, as a lot of you know, Stephen's done a lot on the channel with the Sacred Wisdom podcast. You can check all them out. And Stephen is going to be starting doing his own content as well later on in the year. So this is all coming bit by bit, which is very busy with lots of personal things, as we all are at the moment.
Yeah, I certainly am very, very busy at the moment, just as you are, Zach.
One of the chapters which we think is very significant really for this time, and the deletion of Tartaria, a lot of people question that and why that happened and what actually happened as well, because obviously to some level we can speculate, but there are key events, and Mr. Stephen Denman has really gone into them events and really homed in and found out when them resets were, them particular points in time. And yeah, it really is fascinating. A lot of history that we think we've been told is not really the full truth. There is a lot of information around history that we're not told about, certain worldwide events that happen, and that creates, unfortunately, a lot of conspiracies. But first and foremost, let's talk about a little bit about the deletion. So
okay, the first thing we need to understand with the deletion of Great Tartaria, the deletion of the old world empire, is the fact it did not happen in one singular Pacific event on one Pacific, date in one Pacific year. We have to remember there was a number of progressive events that compounded the previous events that literally led to the entire destruction of most of Great Tartaria in both in northern Russia and the colonies of the old world empire in parts of Western Europe, in the United States of America, the Dominion of Canada, obviously, and many other locations on planet Earth. So there seems to be certain researchers out there, obviously all names withheld, who have this idea there was one sort of cataclysmic event on one Pacific date, and then suddenly the vast expanse of Great Tartaria in northern Russia and all its colonies around planet Earth suddenly were all destroyed in a short matter of time. If you actually think logistically, if that was to have taken place, it would be anomalous really to much of how the narrative of world history, even different aspects of world folklore, world mythology have occurred and arisen throughout the last few thousand years. So it doesn't make any sense to really say that. Obviously, with what happened with the atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. If we take a look at World War II, for example, there was a large number of geopolitical, financial, and cultural events that took place leading up to the outbreak of World War II and to its ending with victory in Europe on the 8th of May 1945. And obviously what happened against the imperial state of Japan and everything else with the United States and other countries that came in there in the Asia Pacific region, those events again were convergent and progressive over time, and so the finality of that vast conflict in World War II was a multifaceted set of events that progressed in linear space-time in the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension here on planet Earth. And I'm giving that as an analogy with really when you understand the destruction of Great Tartaria, there could never have been one singular event. It was a multifaceted approach has to be taken here. I think it's important from the outset of this discussion to sort of say that, because the information we're going to cover in this Sacred Wisdom podcast on the deletion of Tartaria will explain that.
So, just on that point then. Yeah, so what would you say the first event was, just out of interest? What do you think it was?
So, from my thinking, that when the first mud flood reached the pinnacle of its destructive phase, sort of around the 8th of January 1740, what we are looking at there is really the initiation of or the initial stage of the destruction that led to Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire.
And what do you say triggered that event? Do you think it was more the Great Frost?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, I mean, without going into sort of, you know, looking at world meteorology and weather records and so forth, and you can even go back to woodcuts and various acrylic paintings and various documents that are archived with different, you know, different governmental bodies, not here in the United Kingdom actually, but also across Western Europe. We know that there was the Great Frosts, there was the Great Thaws.
1709, I think that was.
Yeah, and there were smaller versions of that as well. So we know that, again, these are stages of progression in terms of climatic change, going back many centuries, going back, and we can see how this built up to the first mud flood, which really did reach its most destructive phase around the 8th of January 1740. So we know that it wasn't as though out of nowhere, you know, billions of cubic tons of silt and gravel and, you know, sort of muddy water suddenly poured down across, you know, the northern Urals and moved through the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia and then spread out. And in many other locations, I'm just giving one, that's just one geographic location. There's multiple that we can mention in northern Russia. So that
there was a triggering of these mud floods.
And that first mud flood then created the vast movement, the vast migration of Russian peoples, which includes the Turkic peoples, many of whom were Nordic Tartarians. They had, you know, the classic blonde hair and blue eyes, red hair and green eyes, pale complexions. But many of the different Turkic peoples we know today that you can class as, for example, Uzbekistanis and Kazakhstanis, Tajikistanis and so forth, these kinds of individuals and their genetics and bloodlines also connect back to the time of Temujin Khan and Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire, which acted really as the precursor to the arising of early Tartaria, which then evolved and developed politically and culturally and spiritually into Great Tartaria many decades later. But we're not going to go into historical
narrative. Just to summarise to people quite quickly, anybody that's just come into this subject, very simply, the idea of Tartaria, the reason why it's deleted, was their connection to the ether and their connection to this old world technology. It didn't run through wires. It didn't run through cables like we have with DC direct current. That is, it run through the ether, which was actually able to transmit through aerials and various other things. But
so that sort of free energy system of the ether, which was discussed quite extensively in the classic world of the ancient Greeks and the Roman Italians and many other polymaths and scholars from other related civilizations. And obviously, again, we're not going to go into discussing, I don't want to digress into talking about the ether.
No, that's a whole other
area.
We'll come on to.
But the wondrous essence, the wondrous nature of Great Tartaria and the beautiful, the elegant and rather grandiose white cities of Great Tartaria. When you look at Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, it was an incredible civilization. It encompassed different cultures. Again, there's a lot of misunderstanding and I would say some rather bad level of study and research that's taken place concerning Great Tartaria, where a lot of individuals think there was this kind of sort of one singularized kind of cultural identity of Great Tartaria, and that is not the case. The reason why it is so unique as a civilization was because it was so accepting of many different cultures. In fact, we still see a lot of remnants of today in the Russian Federation, where you have Russian Orthodox Christianity, where you have obviously the lineage of the House of Romanov and its very long, extensive history going back into the early medieval period of Russia. At the same time, you have when we had what was the Soviet Russia, you had obviously all the countries that would be classed as Islamic or Muslim in Central Asia and so forth. And then you've obviously got other individuals that are Buddhists and so forth. So it was a very multifaceted, quite multicultural,
I think what
global empire.
Just on that note, I think Tartaria, what that did on a worldwide basis, it unified the common law. And where there were all these different cultures and groups of, you know, it's like we have today, but they all mixed under a common law.
When we look at the Christ awareness, and again, quickly summarizing on this point, when we're looking at the healing temples and the divine temples of the white cities of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, what we're looking at is the use of them for somatic restoration of the biological health of the parishioners, both adults and children.
Yeah.
And these Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples fully understood somatic patterns. They understood the use of electroacoustic manipulation, the use of crystals, the use of photons in the form of photonic waveforms, and really I'm just simplifying it even down further, frequency, vibration and energetic resonance connected to the ether. So as a civilization, it was radically different than every other civilization that's really ever existed on planet Earth, and came really and emerged and came out of the collapse of the Mongol Empire of Temujin Khan, or Genghis Khan as he became known, and the Golden Horde, where early Tartaria then morphed and developed into being Great Tartaria, where it was really emphasis was put on spiritual development and really cherishing and protecting and giving adoration to the Christ awareness in these healing temples and divine temples in the White Cities.
So we had obviously, according to the way, especially you've looked at it, is there were 3 mud floods, and
that's right,
the second mud flood. The exact date you'll be giving in a minute, but that was triggered by Mount Tambora. That was the early 1800s, right?
That's right. Yes. So the second mud flood was really, I mean, it may have occurred for other reasons that we're not fully aware of, but we know that one of the main catalytic events was the eruption of the supervolcano known as Mount Tambora. Now, this is Mount Tambora is located on Sumbawa Island. It literally erupted on the 10th of April 1815 in the Asia Pacific region.
5 years, I think it erupted.
Yeah, it went on for a very long time. And this then led really to the shall we say, the exponential possibility and the eventual resulting second mud flood, which occurred at its most devastating phase in northern Russia and actually in parts of Western Europe around the 29th of October 1834.
One little fact with the Mount Tambora is when it happened, the volcanic ash was so heavy over northern Russia. 30 years it was cloud cover. There was cloud cover.
Oh, this was the other aspect. Exactly. So the other aspect to this is the blotting out of sunlight, preventing photosynthesis on the millions of acres of arable farmland in northern Russia around shall we say, the polar Ural Mountains, the northern Ural Mountains in the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north-central Russia. And obviously, we could discuss the different locations, but I'm trying to just keep it as simplified as possible. But the vastness, shall we say, of what is now known as the Russian Arctic coast, stretching all the way from the Kola Peninsula, the Murmansk Oblast of northwestern Russia, through to the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north-central Russia, and right the way out into the Baranga Mountains and also the Kolyma Mountains and the Siberian Russian Far East and the Kamchatka Peninsula all around there. So you're looking at a vast area that was really destroyed, where millions of acres of arable farmland, they couldn't grow fruits, vegetables or cereal crops, which again led to a mass migration of millions of inhabitants moving westward, Eastern Europe, westward and southward out and emptying out the populations of the white cities, or the remnants of the white cities in northern Russia. And, you know, on a side note, it's interesting to note that there's really no funding schedules in scientific research institutes or any universities or colleges to go out and do archaeological excavations in any of these locations I've mentioned. There's many more that I haven't in northern Russia, to actually literally excavate out thousands of cubic tons of silt and gravel and soil and detritus, and find down there the remnants of, you know, the rubble of these healing temples, these divine temples, you know, and the various paraphernalia, the devices and architectural apparatus, or, you know, various different types of metalworks that we use to absorb the ether to generate, you know, for boundless heating and lighting in the healing temples, the divine temples, the crystal palaces and the stately homes of the white cities of Great Tartaria. So we know that this was, as I said, much more than just a singular event. Although the eruption of Mount Tambora reached a violent climax on the 10th of April 1815, increasing levels of steam and small phreatic eruptions occurred during the next 6 months, from around the 14th of October 1815 for up to 3 years, up until around the 21st of April 1818. Now, all of the billions of cubic tons of sulfurous ash and other toxic, smoky chemicals then blotted out the skies of northern Russia. So that obviously this included ashes of silicon dioxide, aluminium oxide, iron oxide, calcium oxide, magnesium oxide,
died, right?
Potassium oxide and sodium oxide, as you said, for over 30 years.
Crazy.
And then the mass migration from Great Tartary and the White Cities then really started to accelerate for northern Russia. And as I said, many fled into southern Russia, down into western Russia, and ultimately would have gone through the Caucasus region and into Eastern Europe. And you know, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, you only have to take the example of what happened in Iceland, I think 5-10 years ago, with the eruption of the volcano on there. A lot of people don't see that this is a possibility. They don't see that. And I don't think we've really been told that and explained that in our history about these volcanic eruptions. It's like, oh, we had all this movement, immigration. Why did it happen? Well, this is why it happened, because of all the stuff that was going on around the planet.
It's ironic because when you look at, you know, the United Nations or the UN or the European Union or the EU, they're very interested in climate change.
Yeah.
But when it comes to historical narratives of connecting the migrations of human beings or Homo sapiens or whatever we can define ourselves as now, moving across different land masses and geographic locations, they never connect in many ways. You know, it's the odd event here. You can go back to Pompeii and the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's very little connectivity made between, you know, migration and therefore perhaps you can say immigration or forced immigration because they've got no choice but to leave their homelands. So, and the first mud flood and the second mud flood, and obviously we're going to come on to discussing the third mud flood, and then really the last years and the final destruction of Great Tartaria.
So the way I see it happen, and I think I feel you share it the same as well, was it wasn't a planned exercise by the elites. They
Nothing
actually
to
knew,
do with them.
They saw this event happening and they saw a way to take advantage of this.
That's
situation.
right. That's a very important point you bring up, Zachary, because this is another thing you find with really terribly inefficiently sort of completed levels of research and studies on the civilization of Great Tartaria. You have certain individuals, again, all names withheld. We don't want to get into that, but they'll say, for example, that the elites had some sort of, sort of covert occult technology, and they were using weaponry from the atmosphere to sort of obliterate the white cities of Great Tartaria. It was nothing like that. There's no credible shred of evidence to ever prove that anything like that's ever taken place. What occurred is exactly what you said, Zach, is they, you know, in terms of, in the Latin, as the Romans would say, carpe diem, seize the moment.
Of course.
So they took that opportunity to then say, well, we were subjugated to the opulence of Great Tartaria. Now it's being destroyed. We will step into that power vacuum and take control.
And that's exactly the way power's always ruled on this planet.
Yeah. So the third party debt banking systems and currencies of exchange, starting to produce what we know now as electricity bills, water bills. All of this started to happen. And the introduction of, cash flow and the ever increasing intricacies of currencies and sterling and so on and so on. This is all really coming off the back of the gradual destruction in stages of Great Tartaria, the waning and the weakening of its cultural influence globally. Really from the time of the destruction of Genghis Khan, who was born as Temujin Khan, who created the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire. That was pretty much one of the shortest civilizations, if not the shortest.
Yeah, they did a lot though.
He did. It was the largest. The Mongol Empire was the largest civilization that has ever existed on planet Earth. But off of its collapse came the emergence of early Tartaria, and then that morphed culturally, as I've said, and ultimately spiritually into becoming Great Tartaria.
Yeah.
So
the third mud flood, we had that coming on to this one. So everything happens in threes, they say.
Yeah,
so that's interesting.
So we know that the third mud flood reached its most destructive phase around the 7th of June, 1892.
Okay.
And then we know that around the 30th of April, 1894, so less than 2 years later, really the whole of the entire civilization of Great Tartaria had been almost eradicated off the face of the earth. You can call them the elites, the policymakers and their secret societies, again, seized that opportunity because of their own control. And it's all about, again, egos and, resource management, effectively, if you simplify it down, on planet Earth. And they literally took that opportunity. I really want to make the point here, when it comes to the eruption of Krakatoa or Krakatau, this was a major contributory factor to the destruction of Great Tartaria through the arising of the third mud flood. It was connected very much to that. By the time of the third mud flood, I want to discuss Krakatoa briefly in a moment, just to round up on this. You have a very profound cartoon that was called Drowned in the Flood. It's by Frederick Burr Opper. And when this came out, what it shows when you see it is pretty clear. It represents the helplessness of the floods and the devastation. It connects it to world folklore and the idea of the Irish.
Like the Alice in Wonderland character, isn't it?
I think it's the idea of the Irish leprechaun is a connection to it. So it's the idea that the civilization of Great Tartaria was rather, shall we say, connected to the lower astral and a 4D holographic reality, where many of these, shall we say, ethereal life forms or beings or existences, such as fairies and gnomes, and then obviously the Irish leprechauns are purported to exist, which is why whenever they've been seen, in the historical narratives of world folklore or maybe aspects of world mythology, they blink in and out of existence because they're able to shift their frequency range. But again, not digressing. We also have to remember at that time, you had on the throne of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Queen Alexandrina Victoria Hanover, known by most as Queen Victoria. So you had the British Empire, and that was in direct competition as the Roman Catholic Church of Italy with Great Tartaria and its incredible understanding and knowledge of the Christ awareness and the ether and the old world empire. Now at the time,
I feel a lot of people were that's ultimately what they're afraid of, is our connection, because once you start looking into this subject and you realize how powerful we are as an individual, as a being, and then as a collective, when we're aware of this information,
that's right.
It's power.
And we have to. And when you realise the mass migrations that were coming in from northern Russia were going into southern Russia and western Russia at the time. The Emperor of Russia, who was also the King of Congress Poland and the Grand Duke of Finland, by the name of Alexander Alexandrovich Romanov, who many know as Alexander III, would have seen, out of his incredible royal palaces, these vast swathes of bedraggled individuals who were Nordic Tartarians and Turkic peoples pouring in to Western Russia, especially into Greater Moscow, which is also sometimes called the Greater Moscow region. And, they would have had a lot of individuals that would needed blankets, medication and food supplies. And again, when you don't get a lot of that reported in Western Europe, and obviously including the United Kingdom of Great Britain, because back then we never had the internet, we didn't have mobile phones.
Or maybe a different type of.
But we didn't have, it wasn't accessible to Joe Public. So it was all in newsprint back then. And what was printed was very selected because they had to obviously be aware of the budgeting costs on the use of A3 paper size, A4 paper size, and so on, and the amount of ink. And it wasn't anything like the kind of modern age we exist in today. So the eruption of Krakatoa or Krakatau, we have to remember, occurred from around the 20th of May 1883 through to the 21st of October 1883. Now, it reached its most devastating moments, this exactly, 11:46 a.m. on the 27th of August 1883. During this event, over 70% of the Krakatoa archipelago, an archipelago means island chain, was completely destroyed, and it collapsed into the Pacific Ocean, creating a vast caldera. So mentioning that the third mud flood then occurred around the 7th of June 1892 was literally, again, it was a repeat of what happened with Mount Tambora, because again, billions of cubic tons of sulfurous ash and all the other chemicals that chemical compounds, whatever I've mentioned there, literally were thrown up into the atmosphere. When they hit the jet streams, they moved up, it passed the Sea of Japan and literally, across the Kamchatka Peninsula and spread across northern Russia. And that eventually came down over Fennoscandia and down into Western Europe, causing massive problems with farming and food shortages. So to give you some scope on the eruption of Krakatoa, which erupted in Western Indonesia. So the idea, the size of the explosion, the epic kind of nature of that explosion in the town of Borzia, which is in the Zabaykalsky Krai of southeastern Russia.
Yeah.
Right. The actual explosion was heard by thousands of Russian citizens. Now, this is at a distance of over 3,952.58 miles,
Wow,
or 6,361.07 kilometers from the eruption of Krakatoa. That gives you the idea of how powerful that explosive eruption was.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. And you realize that all these events have kind of contributed to this, you know, the demise. And it wasn't, and I think there were probably remains after that as well, when civilizations, and maybe even today, there may be in certain remote parts of the world, these civilizations existing, which and took this, you know, old technology and maybe still use it in some parts.
Absolutely.
You know, in parts of the Himalayas, in other parts, remote parts of the world.
Yeah.
But you know, these mud floods did happen, and I think it's a big missing link to our history. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're told isn't all lies, but there is these, you know, little truths, half truths, something carved off the top of a truth. You know, we're giving these little ideas, and then we're so set on history because, you know, this is what we get told, and when we step out of that, you know, domain of what we've been told, and we have our own perspective, or we have another perspective, it can really shape people's realities. And I think this is what it comes down to. We agree with some of history. We don't, you know, disagree with all of it. No. And I just say to anybody researching, looking into this subject, be very logical about it, because you could speculate till the cows come home. There is so much information. We can start making up anything about Tartaria, and I think it's getting sometimes a little bit ridiculous. What I'm noticing,
I'm seeing, you know, on many of the videos on YouTube and even posts going up on Facebook and other social media platforms, so much wild and almost ridiculous speculation on Great Tartaria with almost very little actual credible research being done, or individuals taking other people's research and studies, misinterpreting it, or and putting out incorrect information based off what they've read, but not actually understanding what's going on. And there seems to be this almost sort of like idea that Great Tartaria was fairyland, and we should all look back to this sort of golden age of wonderment and magical thinking.
And there is magical elements to it.
There was in a way, but it was only because of the free energy systems and the Christ awareness. I mean, the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples were very aware of what surrounded the borders of their own territories. They knew there was various competing civilizations that were based on third-party debt usury, the use of currencies, the use of notage and coinage, that were based on warfare and conflict. So the British Empire is pretty much the best example of that in the modern age, of a civilization that was a maritime civilization based on conquest and usury and resource management from various countries, whereas Great Tartaria in northern Russia was nothing to do with any of that. There was no exploitation, there was no deception, there was nothing like that amongst the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples. And obviously we see the arising out of Imperial Russia and the Romanov royal family of what then eventually became Soviet Russia. And in the modern age, you know, post-Soviet Russia, that is predominantly now capitalist Russia, obviously with a sort of political framework of communism. But the essence is there. Much of really what Great Tartaria was and is still to some extent connected to the Russian Orthodox Church. It's still there, the remnants buried under billions of cubic tons of silt and gravel and clay and soil in parts of the Kola Peninsula, Mangsta Blast of northwestern Russia, the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia, and across the Russian Far East, across the Kolyma Mountains and many other locations, you know. And really this is what needs to be going on, is teams of European archaeologists and others need to go out there with funding and do proper excavations and digs, and they will be very shocked and surprised at what they find. But of course, if this takes place, then what you'll see in Scientific American, New Scientist and Nature magazine is a complete refutation of what much of Western science has been about in terms of its historical narrative, which is a huge amount of incorrect thinking based on what has gone on the last 150 to 200 years on planet Earth.
And I think it's been molded and shaped to fit someone else's narrative and someone else's history, his story.
Well, those that took control had a vested interest. The policymakers, the elites, the secret societies, the European monarchs of the royal houses, they had a very important vested interest in trying to conceal the wondrous previous incredible existence of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, and to try and create the deletion of Tartaria so that, you know, as we've discussed so extensively in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, there would be a mental, a spiritual, psychological, cultural, architectural, and ultimately, and in many ways, a spiritual forgetting of Great Tartaria. But that is not the case. It is still there.
Yeah.
And we have discussed that scientific remote viewing, SRV, has been done. And we did go in, I'm not going to go into that now, but we mentioned...
We'll do a whole episode on that.
We did mention individuals and scientific remote viewing, or SRV, and they did confirm and prove that Great Tartaria did exist as a vast civilization. And again, it's like everything else. Even here in the modern age, you see Western science and, you know, many officials from the US federal government, ultimately from the US Defense Department, they put out videos of UFOs, but there's still that continual denial. There's not an open, just, yes, they exist.
No, they do, they don't.
Statement.
Oh, they're here, they're not.
Yeah, it's a constant ambivalence.
Here we are, there they're not. It's just all the time.
It's all ambivalence and contradiction.
You know, we got this new bit of information, then the new bit of information doesn't come out.
That's right.
It's all the same. It's a shame, but we'll get there one day.
We will indeed.
You know, so, but, you know, just to echo in what Stephen's saying, I think, you know, that we are in a time, remember, we are here now. You know, Tartaria was the past, and there are things we can build from that having that civilization exist into this civilization now. And I feel that's the way we should look at Tartaria, not with this like nostalgic way that we look at. Some people look at Tartaria like it's, you know, we lost all this. It's part of history. History's been barbaric. There's been awful things that have happened in history. We're coming out of that now. I think we're in a new cycle. We're coming out of that trauma slowly. I think lifting out. I think planet Earth will be a very different place in 5-10 years time, as it's changing every day rapidly at the moment. Then thank you, Stephen. That's been brilliant, and really thanks a lot for that. That is a chapter in our book, Vanished Kingdoms, which is available on Amazon in paperback and on my website as well. You can purchase that. We are going to be doing a lot more podcasts coming up on Tartaria, a lot more in person as well. We're going to be interviewing other people as well, getting other people on board to give this historical evidence and back this information up more and more in a logical way. But Stephen, thank you so much, my brother.
That's right.
That's brilliant. And thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. You can also join the members section. We're going to be doing lots more on Tartaria, but for now, it's a bye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Noin. Eli semmoinen pläjäys. Ja tuo oli konekääntämisellä tehty, nuo tekstitykset, niin ne on vähän mitä ne on, kun ei vielä suomeksi käynyt niin hyvin. Mutta tuo englannin kieli on hyvin selkeätä, ja tuosta on helppo seurata ja pysyä kuitenkin kärryillä pääpiirteissä, että missä mennään. Ja tämä oli siitä tosi nasta, niin mä linkkaan tuon Zachariuksen kanavan tuohon tämän jakson esittelyyn. Jos te olette kiinnostuneita siitä, niin voitte mennä katsoa. Mä en ole katsonut mitään muuta jaksoa kuin tämän. Siitä. Niin, tässä puhuttiin hyvin maltillisesti tuosta Tartariasta. Sen mä tiedän, että Tartaria on ollut olemassa. Mä oon törmännyt siihen niin monesta eri lähteistä. Sitten toinen asia on se, että mitä se Tartaria oli. Ja tässä on tosiaan, että menisi 3 mutatulvan tämmöisen luonnonmullistuksen kautta. Ja sitten tuossa nyt ei painotettu sitä, että se 1892, niin sen jälkeen sitten tuli ensimmäinen maailmansota ja sitten toinen maailmansota, jotka sitten viimeisteli sen lopullisen tuhon. Ja tietenkään ei voi unohtaa Ranskan vallankumousta, Napoleonin sotia ja muuta, millä on ollut myös sitten isot vaikutukset tuohon. Ja sitten tuo hienoa, että siinä tuotiin esille ajatusta, että oli sitten nämä koronkiskojat ja muut, jotka sitten toi nämä sähkölaskut ja fiat-rahat ja muuta, niin että ne ei olisi ollut käytössä silloin siinä tartarialaisessa maailmassa, vaan ne on tullut sitten jälkeenpäin ja he pääsivät valtaan, koska tuo edellinen tuhoutui pääsääntöisten luonnonmullistusten kautta, eli heillä oli tämä mahdollisuus tarttua siihen. Niin se oli silleen kiinnostavaa, ja just se tämä, että he painottaa, että ei ollut mitään okkultistia ja avaruudesta tulevia jotain ihmeaseita, joilla sitten tuhottiin tämä Tartaria, ja myös sekin, että se Tartaria oli lähinnä, että se oli sitä vapaata energiaa ja kristustietoisuutta, mitä se oli, että ei sekään ollut mikään niin kuin UFO-paikka, vaan ihan normaalia kehittyneempää elämää. Mutta tämmöisiä suuria nollauksia on tapahtunut, ja tässä nyt tuotiin, mä en ole itse käynyt katsomaan, että pitääkö nämä maanjärjestykset ja tulivuorijutut, niin nuo ajankohdat paikkansa todennäköisesti pitävät, koska en usko, että he julkaisevat kirjoja tommosia, että vetävät niitä hatusta. Mutta tällainen. Ja kaikilla, joita kiinnostaa tämmöinen aihe, niin pistäkää tuohon, ensinnäkin käykää subscribeamassa ja tykkäämässä kanavaa, mutta laittakaa sitä tuonne keskusteluketjuun linkkejä tai muuta, jos teillä tulee ajatuksia, mitkä liittyy tähän näin. Ja huomenna, sitten sunnuntaina, niin palataan taas tuohon politiikan pariin, maailman politiikkaan, ja silloin on myös kiinnostava vieras. Ja sitten puhutaan erilaisista asioista, mutta hyvää viikonloppua kaikille vaan tätä Tyrnävä Shown Datsalta.